An animal is a multicellular organism that eats, lives, breathes, doesn't have cell walls or chlorophyll, and has a complex brain and organ system. That's how a group of my peers defined an animal. After a while of hearing how people talked about animals, I decided that I wanted to explore the discrepancy between what they really are and how people perceive them to be. And so I took 11 of my friends and peers and had them take a survey in which they had to define an animal, list every animal they could off the top of their head, and identify some organisms based off of photos. So their definition was a little bit incomplete because it's really hard to define such a complex thing as an animal. Once you get into the phylogeny of animals, the taxonomic classifications get a little bit tricky, a little bit blurry, a little more nuanced. And so it's hard to define, but a definition of an animal I like to use is a heterotrophic multicellular organism that's able to sexually reproduce, rapidly respond to its environment, and use aerobic respiration. So all that means is it eats organic material, it's able to breathe in oxygen and breathe out carbon dioxide, and it needs a partner to reproduce. So part of my survey was identifying organisms based off of photos. So I provided these photos. There are 5 of them up here, and when you think of an animal, maybe you don't think of something that looks like any of these, but all 5 images shown are in fact animals. So we have a sea pen, we have a nematode worm, a sea sponge, a clam, and a copepod. And unfortunately, there was only a 30% success rate in people identifying these correctly as members of the animal kingdom. So I study biology, and part of that is I took an animal biology class a while ago, and it helped me unlearn the assumptions that I had before about the definition of an animal. Before, I used to assume that it must be really motile. It's moving around, it's very lively, and it has to have a complex brain, but that isn't necessarily the case. So let me paint a picture of how I think about animals now. Over 700 million years ago is when animals started to evolve, and they evolved from something like that sea sponge there. And nowadays, over 90% of these animals are invertebrates. So what we classically think of as an animal might not be what's actually the majority. So the representation is a little bit off there. And you can see here, it's a breakdown of percentage of species in each main phylum of the animal kingdom. So we can see arthropods, which are bugs and crustaceans and things like that, are the majority of all animals. And then we have mollusks in second. And then our third one is chordata, which is what contains all vertebrate animals. And so what we have here shows just those proportions. And there's a lot of diversity between these. So you can see here, all of these have really defining features. You know, you wouldn't mix up an arthropod like a bug with a flatworm, let's say. So there's a lot of defining features between those. It's a ton of animal diversity that we don't normally cover. And even within these, like let's say the mollusk phylum, there is a ton of diversity. So all mollusks have several shared traits, ancestral traits. Like they have a radula instead of teeth, they have a muscular foot of their body, and they have an internal or external shell of some type. But they can take a lot of different forms. So they can take the form of this octopus, which is a cephalopod. They could take a form of this snail, which is a gastropod, a bivalve like a clam, or even these really cool scaled, colorful animals, chitons. So you can see there's a lot of diversity there. So these are the results of the other part of my survey, in which I had people just list every animal they could think of. And you can see here that it is pretty much inverted We have chordata with 83% of the answers given. And then we have the arthropods only have 3%. And so even though arthropods are the majority, like thousands and thousands and thousands of species of those are animals, there were only a handful of answers given in arthropods. Interestingly, though, the mollusk section, 6% of the answers were mollusks, matches exactly with the proportion of mollusk species found in nature. And I think I would attribute this to the fact that all the peers I took live near Puget Sound, and we all hear about those mollusk species a little bit more, those sea creatures. And so I think the familiarity and the proximity helped people get that kind of accurate. So accurate representation of that. And then everything else was just in very, very small proportions. So why is this important? It really comes down to a fundamental misunderstanding that I've noticed as I study biology, as I study animals inside and outside of school, which is that people don't necessarily know what an animal is. So I gave you that definition, but do you really know what to look for, is what I'm getting at. And there's just this interesting attitude about animals where there is a hierarchy in our minds, where people are at the top, and the more traits an animal has that are similar to a human, the higher up they are in our minds, kind of subconsciously, and we think they're worthy of more respect. And so that's the pattern I've noticed. And I think it also connects a lot to people misunderstanding evolution, because there's a lot of focus on the survival of the fittest idea, which is absolutely part of it. But there's a little bit less focus on the ecological connection of everything. And so here I've provided a bunch of images of areas local to here, different environments, different habitats we have around here. And so there's just a really vast diversity of animals living around us that we don't necessarily come face to face to in everyday life. So think about the things that are popular aren't necessarily the ones that are abundant. Okay, here we see the abundance, here we see the popularity. So think about maybe what are the most popular animals people have as their favorite animals. Like a lot of people, cats and dogs, big things. Maybe it's a fish, maybe it's a bird. It's all vertebrates most of the time. And think about what endangered species you hear about the most. Maybe it's a tiger, maybe it's a panda. Big, charismatic animals. That's what we seem to care about a lot. And, you know, like, when's the last time you heard someone say, save the turtles, which are big, charismatic things to us, compared to people saying, maybe save the mollusks from ocean acidification or something like that. So here we have the popularity again. And so if people actively try to understand the ecological perspective of evolution, I think that would be really helpful to us, to our communities, in an ecological perspective, and our environments as a whole. So here I've provided, we have multiple different environments. We have tons of wetlands around here, estuaries, beautiful, beautiful environments. There are thousands of invertebrate species in the Puget Sound. And here I show two different graphs. The one on the left is a saltwater food web of a local environment, and this one is a freshwater food web. So you can't read all the labels on there, but that's not the point. We want to see that there are so many connections. So imagine an animal that you've never seen before. You don't really care about it. If it disappeared, it wouldn't affect you. But that's not necessarily the case. Imagine if we took out just one of these little things. It has so many different connections that there's a domino effect. Like, a key principle of ecology is the connection idea. So if there's a species population that's damaged, If one of these things disappeared or got really small numbers, that would have a domino effect on the species around it. And similarly, if we have this whole saltwater environment and it gets all imbalanced and out of whack, it can have a domino effect on this freshwater environment as well. And so the connection is just so important. And so I think that it's important to imagine these things. I think it's important to actively try and research the most abundant animals around us, because there are tons of people who care about climate and environmental issues, and to actively know what lives in the environment around you is really important to how you care for it. So I think that it is time that we evolve our mindsets to better live in the world around us, live in a symbiosis with our planet, and recognize the animal diversity so that we adequately know how to take care of our ecosystems so that they can continue to take care of us. Thank you.